Those Oregon folks invading the Midwest. Ryan, what's going on?
Mark, how we doing? My
We're,
friend, how are you?
we're doing great. Maybe not as great as you are. I would like to do the show from outside. I have dreamed many times of being able to put the entire set on rollers, just like on a platform with rollers, and I'd roll it out when it was nice out, and I'd roll it back in at night, and that would be my dream.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's just all about trying to get internet access out here on the edge of the continent. Sometimes it's a little difficult.
Well, Dan Lanning seemed to command the room pretty well, and he's got that way about him. We had Matt Zemek on from Trojans Wire, and of course, we ran through USC. But his other impression of this entire festivity today was that Dan Lanning loves his football team, is ultra confident about his program, loves being in the Big Ten, thinks it's the best conference, is ready for the challenge, and all things are just thumbs up.
Absolutely. I think he killed it. I watched everything, as we all do, as football junkies that we are. And I think his opening statement was just tremendous. I think he came out and nailed it. I think he hit every point that was trying to be made. But, he doesn't come off sounding like a politician, right? We're in these era of these politician. Everything is, I got to talk about this and go back to this statement and this statement. Never answer the question correctly. Never answer what the guy's actually asking. Go back to the platform. And, I heard a lot of that throughout the other coaches. No offense to those other guys, but they have to be on brand. And it feels like Dan Lanning has a little bit more authenticity to that. And it feels like it just comes across a little bit more natural than some of these other guys, to compare and contrast just their opening statement. It felt like, PJ Fleck felt like he was yelling at me through the thing. I felt like, geez, okay. So it just contrasting styles, but you're right about Dan Lanning. I think he has the blueprint. He knows what he's doing, and he has a vision for the future.
That's funny you say that about PJ Fleck, because I just had the coaches rolling one after another. I wasn't doing it live, listening to it live. I try to conserve the time and just rip through them one by one. And when PJ Fleck, I was in the kitchen doing stuff and I'm listening, taking notes while I'm cooking, doing other stuff. PJ Fleck came on. I had to run over to the laptop, kind of knock him down a few rungs on the volume meter. He loves to preach. Our buddy Steve Dace likes to liken him to. He says PJ Fleck is basically what you would get if a Pentecostal youth pastor was a head coach of a football team. So.
I mean, row the boat. I mean, he's already got it. He can just transition right away, right into the service with row the boat. That's his first sermon right there.
That's it. Also, I was going to say PJ Fleck. He's on the brain now. Dan Lanning was able to specifically talk about what makes Oregon unique, and that they're not going to shy away from that. They're certainly going to be themselves. They're going to bring this brand. He mentioned the ducks in the water. We bring him on the road. That's what we're going to do. We may have a different uniform than you expected us to wear against your team. All of that comes with the Oregon brand.
And I think that's great. I've got a YouTube channel out here, and I try to do it differently than other people as well. I've done it for a long time. I do a live stream, and we'll end up chatting about pie or something. It turns into food chat. How do you like your steak? Questions or whatever. And I think there's a willingness to be a little different out here, and I think if you embrace that, doesn't mean you need to be completely different, right? It doesn't mean you need to be exactly the opposite of everybody else. I think there's a blueprint for being a successful football team, right? And he's got it, and he understands this. You got to have togetherness, you got to have toughness, you got to have all these things. But a lot of this is coach speak. I think what Dan Lanning has really done well out here is embraced that we're doing it different, and you have to do it different to be competitive. Nike and Oregon have a very organic, unique relationship. You need to lean into that. While other people are trying to use that as a reason why you're successful, because of Nike. Nike's not buying their success right now in their stock pricing. They'd like to have that thing go back up to where. My point being is that everything is ebb and flow, and I think Oregon knows right now they're a hot ticket and they're a hot name, and people want to be a part of it. They're exciting. They're a brand that's exciting. And they're coming into a new conference that's really steeped in tradition. And so they're going to come out here and do something different. But we're not going to come out here to try to piss people off. We're doing it. We always try to do it in a little bit lighthearted manner. The classic example is throw that gigantic duck in the river. That is genius. That's the kind of thing that Oregon branding does differently, and we're willing to do it differently. It might be a chuckle from some of the old school, who say, "Oh, you're not taking it serious," or something. But we're trying to keep it light, and I think Dan Lanning has really embraced that. To compare and contrast, I think Mario Cristobal struggled with that a little bit. I think Mario wanted to tamp it down a little bit. He didn't want the jerseys so excited. He didn't want to wear the same he didn't want to wear different outfits all the time. He wore the same shirt basically for 3 or 4 years. And the whole point is, I think that if you embrace the different at Oregon, you can really do some stuff, because I don't think you really can compete tradition to tradition with some of these blue bloods that we have out there.
Speaking of which, the chief competitor appears to be, and the preseason prognostications don't always fall in line with what it's supposed to be, but Ohio State's typically a national factor, meaning just basically every year. And it's a neck and neck race, it seems, with the Buckeyes for the Big Ten championship, at least on paper. I'm sure Michigan and others will have something to say about it. Certainly, Ohio State's so good and so talented that Oregon could have a lights out season and not win the Big Ten championship. That would be fine. They could go to the playoff and still have a second life to win a championship there. Or they certainly are capable of beating Ohio State both in the regular season or a championship game rematch and winning the conference, because they seem to be that good and that prepared. Our buddy Spencer McLaughlin asked a question about the defensive line, the interior in particular. Does that seem to be maybe the only separation between those two teams, or maybe the only concern that Oregon has from an X's and O's standpoint?
I think the Oregon defensive line, and shouts out to Spencer McLaughlin, he did a great job over there. I think the defensive line is something, just because you have guys you are replacing who were really quality players and who had been there a long time. So I think there's actually a lot of really good players on the defensive line. People just might not know that much of them. They're younger guys, but Dan Lanning talked about a couple of them in his interviews today. And I think that when it comes to Ohio State, you got to tip the cap to Ohio State. Mark, you and I both love history a little bit. When Oregon played Ohio State in 2010 in that Rose Bowl, Terrell Pryor and last year, Jim Tressel or whatever, those last couple of years, that team had lost a couple BCS games in a row, maybe 2 or 3 in a row up to that point. And they were on a mission. That team was absolutely on a mission. This Ohio State team reminds me a lot of that, in that same setting. They've had the last couple of years trouble with Michigan. It feels like this year they're going to completely flip the script on that one. It feels like they've got the upper hand. They're the team to beat. They've got all the pieces they want. It's just whether they can put it all together. Oregon finds itself, I think, in the same kind of category, where they had a heck of a year last year, and they've been building. Each year they have been getting progressively better, and you expect this team to be really good. Can Oregon's defensive line hold up against this onslaught of great offensive lines in the Big Ten? I think that's why you play the games. But I do think that historically, Oregon has done fairly well against the Big Ten opponents when they face them. And I think sometimes a lot is to be said about physicality of this, that, and the other. I think Oregon has become a much, much more physical team. Not only with Dan Lanning, also with Mario Cristobal. So it's been building.
I guess we'll stay on this comparison because from a rhetoric standpoint, it doesn't seem much different for Ohio State. Maybe they've got a little more hype than usual, but not much. They've averaged 11-1 for 20 straight years. So their players just continue to say, well, beat Michigan, win the Big Ten championship, win the national championship. That's what our goals are every year. So this is no different. What's a successful season for Oregon? Because a national championship, not that they're not capable of winning it, but it's a difficult climb through this playoff. So what would make you satisfied this season?
Well, let's start with that Ohio State game at Autzen, right? So I think the reason I think that Oregon is in a lot of people's lists of possible potential national championship contenders is one, I think the schedule breaks out for them, right? They have marquee games against marquee teams. If they can get those wins, they're going to be very well respected. At the same time, they have the big game against Ohio State at home, and I think that that's going to play a big part in their success. If they get past Ohio State, now you're writing a different story for that rest of that schedule, right? Because now it's about, can you hold on and get the right seeding, or we get the right this, that, or the other, and put yourself in a position, because you know as well as I do that in the past, Oregon could very well, just as well, win against Ohio State and then lose another game down the road that they shouldn't lose, Maryland or something. Now, the ideology is, no offense to Maryland, but the ideology is that I think we've kind of done the calculation of what this schedule could look like. There could be 2 or 3 opportunities for this game to happen. You could see it at Autzen. You could see it again in the Big Ten championship game if Oregon holds serve the rest of the year, maybe loses to Ohio State, or vice versa. You could also possibly see this as a 12-team playoff at some point in there. It's an absolute storybook sort of situation for this. I think Oregon needs to beat Ohio State in game 1 at Autzen to really make their case. I think that if they go through the losers bracket, I think that's a fine story. I think that's great for them, but it's kind of what was expected for them, right? I think the actual bar has been set, that the expectation is to get to the 12-team playoff for Oregon. I think that is a legitimate expectation. And they've been so close, and if you would have done it last year, you would have been in it, right? Whether or not they win the national championship, that I think is a completely different bar, right, to be set. Doesn't mean that you can't do it, and if you're in the 12-team playoff, then you should have just as much of an opportunity as anybody else. But I do think that if you get yourself into the 12-team playoff, maybe host that first game, I think you're in a real sweet spot. Anything can happen at that point. You got to roll the dice, but I don't think you set yourself up for failure this year by saying you have to win the national championship for it to be a success. I don't think Oregon's in that position yet.
We've got Ryan Winter here from Sports Chat 503, so you can catch Ryan's work right here on YouTube, and I encourage you to do so. Ryan, you're a guy that enjoys interacting with other college football fans, enjoying a good road trip to a different stadium, a different part of the country. And of course, you held the Pac-12 near and dear to your heart, making those trips obviously more regularly. Have you already thought about where you might venture this fall?
Oh, yeah, I've already booked. We're going to Michigan. So Michigan is this year. Next year is Penn State. There's opportunities there in the future, Ohio State. But I'm really wanting to go to Wisconsin. I don't know how the schedule is going to break down in the future. And when it breaks down into a thing where you could play a team 1 year and then not play them for another 2 years possibly, or whatever the case may be at home. I don't know when the next time Oregon's going to play out at Madison. So that's one that's exciting at the end of the year. No offense to Purdue. The Northwestern game next year is going to be wild because it's in the little soccer stadium. That could be interesting trying to get seats for. But yeah, no, I'm excited to go see other schools. My son is going to be a freshman at Oregon this year. So his first year of being at Oregon is in the Big Ten. He'll have his next 4 years. We'll try to go on the road to a variety of different games if we can. But it is a definite different journey. I mean, we're going to travel overnight to get to some places, or have to take an extra day to get there. If you have any sort of snafu when it comes to the airline or something, we could be completely out. If the plane doesn't leave on one day, the next plane leaves the next day. We're used to being able to go to Los Angeles like at any time. Like, oh, you missed the 12:30, there's a 3:30 next. But the Pac-12, you're right. To give one last shout out to the Pac-12, I went through my stages of grief with the Pac-12. I hit them all. I was in disappointment and depression and anger and all that stuff for quite a while, because I do think that it's a shame that they took our conference from us on the West Coast. Everybody wanted a part of the West Coast, but nobody wanted the West Coast to be its own thing. And there was poor leadership and everything else, but I do think that our conference out here was a great conference. But you know what? Now I'm on to bigger and better things. I've gone to acceptance in the stages of grief, and now I'm looking forward. I'm looking at hope, And I think Oregon's got a real shot at it. I also think that Oregon's going to do fairly well in the other sports, especially men's basketball. So I do like Oregon's transition. I think Dan Lanning is the guy to do it. I also have to give a shout out to Dan Lanning this last year. He had a unique thing where when Saban retired, there was all that noise about Lanning. The biggest thing by far of the entire year was when Lanning said, he's staying, the grass is damn green in Eugene. They said, the parents said, what do I need to do? Or Dan Lanning said, what do I need to do? The parents said, how about do a video? He does the video, he sends it out to her, and then of course it gets over like 1 million views. I mean, the Oregon creative team is fantastic. But Dan Lanning staying and really cementing his legacy here and saying, this is where I want to be, that was the biggest thing for us, because it felt like we were getting into some stepping stone stuff where people were leaving for their dream job. And we feel like Oregon's a great place to be. And so the fact that he kind of reverberated that and volleyed that back to the rest of the nation, I think is fantastic.
Ryan, we always appreciate you stopping by. It's always good to see you, man. And enjoy the rest of your summer. The football is going to get here soon enough. So enjoy the rest of your summer, and we will talk soon.
Obviously, yes. So I'm out on the golf course. Blessings to you and your family, Mark. Really appreciate you and everything you do for college football, buddy.
Thank you, Ryan. Sports Chat 503, everyone. We'll see you, Ryan.
Thanks so much, Mark.